to close on Shabbos. Thus, in effect, Hitler intentionally ordered that the Jewish shops be closed on Shabbos. This event aroused even liberal Jews to self-examination. Many of them remembered Shabbos and streamed to the synagogues. Is it any more than right to see this event as the finger of God, teaching a lesson which should be learned for all time? Zionist newspaper, 1933. Hitler brought us back to keeping Shabbos. I can't do business. I might as well go to the synagogue. I'm going to put that on the table, and it's something we have to think about and understand. That our reaction to anti-Semitism is never a reaction of this is insane, this is irrational. It is irrational, but we should understand the irrationality is directly brought from Hashem. Hashem uses anti-Semitism to remind us that we have a mission, to bring us back to who we really can be. Now, I'd like to say that during the war, during the Holocaust, the more one studies the literature, the more one understands that the Jew was brought back to who he really is. The Ibn Ezra says something very beautiful. He says, the purpose of life is to love. That statement doesn't mean much in English because love doesn't mean anything in English. But in Hebrew it means a lot. Because the word ehov means I will give. That means that the purpose of life is to give. To resemble the Almighty by giving. And if I can resemble the Almighty through giving, God is a giver, I'm going to be a giver. I can make my soul more like the Almighty, and thereby be capable of being in a relationship with the Almighty for eternity. Because I'm more like Him. I can relate more to what I'm like. The purpose of life is to love. Ehov, I will give, is to give. I saw a story in a book that transformed my life this year. And I know Shoshana is going to say she knows the person. Written by a woman in Israel called Sarah Rigler, called The Holy Woman. And she writes in the beginning of this book, there's a woman who, Chaya Sarah Kramer, who survived the Holocaust. Not only survived the Holocaust, she was in Auschwitz. She had been used by Mengele, Yimak Shemo, for experiments. She survived. She thought she was going to die. She ends up in Eretz Yisrael and she lives. She marries a very, very great individual, not capable of having children, but living a life of tremendous giving. In fact, I met these people about 20-something years ago, not knowing who they were, thinking they were simple farmers who lived in the north of Israel. I didn't realize who they were until I read the book. And the woman who writes this book says that she had a very amazing encounter with her. One of her first encounters was, they were sitting together, and this woman who wrote the book, Sarah Rigler, this well-known writer, she states, so I could state it, she'd been in an ashram for 12 years. In ashram, she was very immersed in Hinduism, studying in an ashram. Apparently in the ashram, a rabbi found her and discussed Judaism with her, and she realized that she was deficient in her knowledge of who she was, and decided to go to Israel to study and to learn. Eventually she became a very, very righteous Baal Tshuva and lives in the old city of Yerushalayim. But at this time she's speaking to this woman, Chaya Sarah Kramer, and she's telling about the ashram. So Chaya Sarah Kramer says something to her, says to her, I have to tell you something. The ashram where you are for 12 years, that was a bad place. He says, I know. Auschwitz, on the other hand, was a good place. So she looks at her. I know religious people are, have a lot of, that doesn't make any sense to me. What do you mean Auschwitz was a good place? And she said back, when you were in the ashram, You spent 12 years in meditation and reflection, but it was all about you. It was all about your relationship with this spiritual being, all about your spiritual inside. It's all about you. When we were on the train going to Auschwitz, I made sure that I learned the Yom Kippur Tefillot, because I was concerned that the other girls who were with me didn't know it and we would not be able to daven Yom Kippur. There was another girl next to me, she worked on memorizing the Megillat Esther. So if we're going to be there during Purim, we'll be able to read the Megillah. While we were in Auschwitz, we lived for each other. If you live for each other, wherever you are is a good place. The ashram was a bad place. When I read that story, I understood what the Ibn Ezra meant. Life is for love. The purpose of life is to be a giver like the Almighty. And wherever we are, if we're in a position where we can give to another, it's a good place. Because we have the opportunity to resemble the Almighty. The more we look at the Holocaust, the more we discover the way the Jew conducted himself in the most horrendous situations. But it was always as a Jew. The definition our rabbis tell us, the Gemara in Yuma, in Yevamot, that if you meet someone who claims to be a Jew but he does not possess the qualities of Rahmanas, mercy, by Shonas, shame, or he's not a Gomel Chasadim, he doesn't do kindness, you have to question whether he is from the seed of Avram Avinu. What should come out in a Jew, when squeezed, should be acts of kindness and love and dedication. Now I want to give you a few examples of this. I know we're pressed for time. Yeah. There's a wonderful sefer by a Lithuanian rabbi who survived the war, Rabbi Ashroy. And in English, it's called Responsive from the Holocaust. In Hebrew, it's a 6 or 7 volume piece called Mina Mamakim. And basically, Rabbi Ashroy was in the Kovno ghetto, and the Germans, in their iniquity, wanted to keep a library as a showcase to what they destroyed, and made him the librarian of the Jewish library. So he had access to the Svarim, to the books. So questions would come his way from other Jews as to what to do in different situations. Since he had access, he could look to Paskin and answer all the questions. And he wrote down a lot of these responses in his 7-volume work. And one can still buy it, I think, in English, called Responsive from the Holocaust. I'd like to share with you just a few of these questions that he received. One I thought was very fascinating. Apparently, in the ghetto, starvation was the norm, as we know. But they were able to smuggle in a small cow. Now this cow, of course, would provide benefit to as many people as they could. An undernourished population needs the nutrition. They had a question. The question was as follows. We have shochtim in the ghetto. We have people who could do the ritual slaughtering. That's not a problem. To slaughter ritually, we know we have to sever the esophagus and the windpipe in one full, uninterrupted line. We have shochtim who could shech the animal, but there's another problem. We know before we can eat meat, we have to salt it. There's no salt in the ghetto. So one possible solution was, well, we can roast the animal. Because, you know, when you kosher liver, what do you do to remove the blood when you kosher liver? You broil it, and by broiling it, you drain out the blood. There's only one problem with that. If people would eat roasted meat, their stomachs, which had already been shrunken by the famine, couldn't absorb it. So he poskined another solution. So we have to boil it. But this is how we have to boil it. We have to make sure that there's always going to be 60 times more water than the meat. Because we know when you have 60 times more of something, you can nullify it, right?